Hello and welcome. Today I'd like to ask you to do something, or at least consider something. Pull the decals off of your Cobalts. If you've got raised lettering on your Regal, if you've got raised lettering on your Mastercraft, or your Wakesetter, or your MB, it's tedium to deal with. It's crazy detail work that takes hours and hours and hours to get it to look right when you're done. You gotta get the special tools, you gotta get little Dremel tips, you have to make sure that you're not leaving behind more residue and gunk than you were trying to initially get out. These are some of the concerns a detailer would have when they're dealing with stuff like this and trying to deliver a decent product for a customer who expects their boat to look amazing. Well, usually it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And I've got a solution, and I'd like you to consider it just for a moment. Picture your boat without the lettering. Now, on this side, we've taken the lettering off. I've left the residue. On this side, we've taken the decal or the emblem off and removed the residue with some acetone. So this is 3M's Heavy Cut and a really aggressive wool pad by 3M. I'm going to spread this out fairly quickly. I don't want that compound to basically become graffiti as it sits in the sun. So I'm going to spread it out, let that oil inside the compound kind of saturate that gel coat, and I'm going to start working this a lot like sandpaper. There's some grit to this compound, so as my wheel's spinning clockwise, I'm going to dig into it, grab those particles and slide them across the gel coat so that they cut into the surface of that gel coat. At some point I will reverse, or at least change the angle about 90 degrees so that I'm cross-cutting. Then, as soon as I like what I see, I'll start flattening out. This will also help me see what it is that the surface is transforming into, and it just basically makes it look a lot nicer as I finish out. It takes care of a majority of the swirls and holograms that you might leave in gel coat, especially dark gel coat, if you're grinding like this. Now this last little patch of compound was hiding a significant little scratch. It wasn't insanely deep, but it was long and it was a little bit wide. You're going to see me go over this a couple times. And what I'd like you to pay attention to is I'm not just putting my buffer into the scratch and grinding. I'm going back and forth, I'm changing the angle of the pad just to make sure that those cuts that are coming across the surface are varied in their angle. So keep a look on that, watch that a little bit, and I believe we're just about to the point where I think, yeah, that's almost good except for that friggin' scratch. So let's grab some more compound, hit it a little bit more, and see if that fixes it. You might be wondering why I leave this squiggle of compound on there as long as I do, when before I said I had to spread it out really quick so that it didn't turn into graffiti. Basically etch its way into the gel coat because the gel coat's so dry that the oil from the compound saturates and changes the light transfer through the gel coat. Anyway, it's a thing. Trust me, if you're a detailer for any length of time, you'll have seen it, experienced it. If you've already saturated the gel coat and you put some more compound on top of that, you're probably not going to run into that as long as you don't let it sit there for too long. So here, I'm getting to that last little part, checking to see how deep that scratch is, how much I can feel it with my finger, and I'm thinking, you know what, I can get this. This isn't going to beat me. Here's an interesting thought. How long would this have taken if you decided to wet sand it as opposed to compound it? In other words, if you had those scratches, if you had the raised three-dimensional topography of the gel coat from the letters after they were removed, because of the years and the different amounts of buffing that occurred on different parts of the gel coat, whether it was something that couldn't be reached by a buffer for 6 years versus the parts that could get reached by a buffer for 6 years, those elevations on the surface are going to be a little bit different because over the years more gel coat was taken off of the places that obviously could get reached. So could you have done this faster and more efficiently with wet sanding? You just saw how fast this took. There's the scratch. You saw the little wiggle in the light reflection. There it is up in the top left. So I don't think so. I think that this process is much quicker, and if you want, you can time this side just to verify it's going to be exactly the same amount of time as it was on the other side. The very next step after all this is done is I take a light compound, probably Finess-it, and just, I don't know, 3 minutes per side, just to kind of clean it up, make sure all the whip marks from the buffer and the heavy cut compound of the previous compounding is taken care of and non-existent, and then boom, wax it. That's it. But those are the 2 steps I guarantee you'd have to use if you were wet sanding on top of the heavy cut and the super duty if you used a really aggressive sandpaper. I know I say this a lot and it sounds like I might be biased, but I don't think that I am. I think in this particular case, wet sanding would have taken an inordinate amount of time compared to this, and the overall finish wouldn't have been that much better. I agree, sometimes when there are topographical issues in gel coat, block sanding to get the high spots down and make it nice and smooth is a nice touch. But how much time do you have? How much are you getting paid? Grab a buffer, deal with it. In this case, I've got a little bit of the residue left from the emblems that were glued onto the side. I didn't take this side and ate it with the acetone. I was just trying to make an example so that you could see that you can actually get some of that residue off with just the buffer wheel. I don't suggest it. It does have a tendency to gum up your buffer wheel, and for the next day or so when you're trying to use it, you can feel it's a little extra sticky. So you might have to actually take it out, wash it down with some solvents or some sort of soap degreaser and get some of that gunk out of your wool pad fibers to make it an effective pad again. Or just keep using it with more and more compound, and in the course of a week it'll probably be clean. But most people don't use their pads every day, all day. For me, it's not a big deal. I highly suggest taking the residue off with an acetone or adhesive remover, something to make it a little bit easier on your wool pad so that it lasts a little bit longer and doesn't give you a hard time by hopping around just because it's extra grabby. And here, when it's really quiet and silent, I should have something really cool and important to tell you, but I got nothing. Sorry. And just like on the other side, if you see something in the gel coat that you don't like after a little bit of compounding, there's no harm in adding a little bit more compounding to the mix. Just go ahead and throw down. Now this time, just like on the other side, I'm not smearing it all over the place and letting it saturate. I'm just digging into it, kind of like I said before, like a sandpaper, just using that grit going up and down basically. Remember, the wheel spins clockwise. Now I'm going at virtually a perpendicular angle, hitting it a little bit more at the 90 degrees from the straight up and down that I was, although now it looks like I'm going straight up and down like I was. So there we go. Now we're getting back into the horizontal cuts that I wanted to see as a cross cut. So if you keep this in mind as you're grinding into something, you cut one way, then you cut the other way. You cut one way, then you cut the other way. Then you flatten out and you take a look and you see if you've done anything that you like, and if you haven't, well, just keep cutting. If you don't have enough to keep cutting, add more compound. Pretty simple. Ooh, scary. Now it's time for the reveal. Keep in mind this is heavy cut compound. You are still going to see a little bit of that raised topography that we were talking about in the gel coat, and any swirls, any sort of imperfections that are left behind. With luck, and probably, like I said, about 3 minutes each side, maybe a minute and 30 each side, probably closer to 3 minutes each side. With a little bit of Finess-it, everything will come together and look amazing. And I know you probably don't believe me, but trust me, when this is done to your boat, you're going to see that guy was right. As you might have expected, I went ahead and compounded the entire boat and waxed it. To be honest, this boat took 2 sets of compounding. There was a repair on the starboard side that I wasn't aware of, and it threw me off with the reflection of the gel coat being a little bit askew. So after the washing, hit it with some wax, took that off, and when I say wax, it could be a polish, sealant, whatever. Just something to cover the boat and make sure that this gets locked in. Now, if the owner wanted to, not that they do, they could get a decal, a nice 2-dimensional chrome decal. 5 feet away, it would look exactly like OEM. And a detailer can buff over that for many, many years. You're not going to have the oxidation buildup and the dirt buildup and the spider buildup and all the other buildups that you could possibly think of. So consider it. Next time you look at your boat and you see those emblems, wonder how I can fix that. Oh yeah, I saw that video on YouTube and that guy was like, brilliant, gave me a great idea.